Hello and welcome back to the next One Piece review and discussion. This chapter covers so much that I was not expecting what Oda was going to give us here. I thought we were so close to just going back to the main story, and all of this was going to get revealed a bit later, or certainly some of this stuff. There was some stuff I just wasn't expecting. It has so much in this chapter that is wrapping up now the end of this flashback because Oda is realizing we are in the end game, and I think this is him telling us we are. So we need to get talking about this. Without further ado, chapter 1167, Ida's Son. And we have a cover story request, and it is Jen and Nojiko being unfazed or not being mad about a cat stealing a book. So it is a pretty nice cover story request as all things go. But we need to talk about this chapter of Elbaf. So last we had left off, it was the conclusion to the climactic battle that was God Valley, the incident that had taken place. We have now found everything out that had happened on that island, who was involved, how it went down, how rocks had been misinterpreted this whole time, and ultimately succumb to death. We saw it was Roger and Garp who, in an all-out Conqueror Haki attack, took him down, but it was Garling who took the finishing blow to eliminate rocks completely. So with the end of that, Rayleigh and Gabon had managed to save Garp and Roger, so they were obviously able to escape, and others had also obviously escaped, and in their own time became key figures in the new generation that would form. In the fallout of that battle, we saw Loki's response. He had idolised and looked up to rocks, wanting to join his crew and go out to sea. He thought he was the sun god, and he found out the news and he was devastated. Equally, even more devastated was Harald. Harald was distraught. He took his rage out on another giant who had stolen from humans, and he couldn't grasp the fact that he let his best friend leave and go to his death without doing something about it. And he was reeling and wrecking himself with this fact, and ultimately he made the decision. So he left Elbaf, he went to Marine HQ himself, he snapped off his own horns and placed them down in front of the gate, and just was like, I will be a slave if I have to make up for the 1,000 years of sins my race has caused. So he's driven down to the point where he wants peace for current Elbaf. He talks about, the kids are being taught differently, and he's taking on the burden of all of those sins. So we pick up 33 years ago from main time. So this is 5 years after God Valley now. And Morgans is interviewing people because there are pirates saying we were approached by something emerged from the mist, and it was like deadly. It was huge. There was nothing we could do. And then there's Impel Down. There was a prisoner explaining, before we knew it, our ship was in ruin. There was no chance of survival. Like, we barely got out, and we're now like locked up in prison. Like, this thing was huge, but it was shaped like a human. It was nuts. And then there's another reporter like interviewing, and he's like, there's no chance we were near the Florian Triangle, so at this point it's established that that place needs to be avoided. And he was like, no, we were nowhere near there, we avoid that anyway. But this dude definitely had a human-like appearance to this creature in the mist. So during this time, 33 years ago, among the Grand Line, the countries began to hear about a certain monster that lurked deep in the foggy seas, and it would only specifically target pirate crews. So we see playing out here a pirate ship, tiny, and a massive ship approaching before Harald himself jumps and just annihilates this pirate ship. The monster is Harald going out and hunting down pirates. So there were very few at this time who sailed those waters who had ever seen a giant. So for them, he was the embodiment of fear. It says, he's coming in and he can just destroy a ship in one swipe. And we've seen that played out in the current story, with Dory and Broggy just annihilating ships on their own and also other giant pirates. So this is Harald in his true, almost ancient giant blood strength, just annihilating ships. And the reason he's doing this is because he now works for the government. He's now working for his, atonement. This is what he has to do, working in the shadows for the Navy. So he is taking out pirate ships that are sailing around the Grand Line. Now, we have a brief recap page. We talk about, we got Kaido, Whitebeard, Big Mom, all gaining infamy, all building up their crews, and over the next decade, they are now the face of this next generation. Most of these pirates would clash over territory, but there was obviously one crew that circumnavigated the entire world, and that was the pirate crew of Goldie Roger, and he was publicly executed. We see the crew, they're all having a nice time, they've done what they had set out to do, but his execution was a public display, a spectacle to show the world government's power. But ultimately, it proved to be their undoing. It plunged the world into even greater turmoil because obviously he declared that One Piece was out there, the greatest treasure, and that set off the great pirate era. Now, the pursuit of Gold Roger's treasure. It is out there somewhere. So the world government had to respond in kind quite quickly. So they enlisted 10 giants and swore them in to join the Navy so that, they could consolidate their strength, they could show power. And during this time, they brought Harald up into Marijua, and we saw that at that very year he was finally granted formal permission to meet with the 5 elders. And in that discussion, we can see a few celestial dragons are talking about how they want to make him a slave. He's an ancient giant. He begins to question something in the room with the Gorosei, and he is questioning about something called a shallow sea contract. And we see that Walker is the one to explain, you can consider yourself now the right hand of the God's Knights, a God's steel. And we see he is being tattooed on his arm with this world government symbol, this crest, that we have seen in a prior flashback between Shanks and Gabon. Shanks also had this symbol on his arm before it was taken by a sea beast. Now, they talk about 3 levels to this contract. There is the shallow sea, which is the most minor contract, pact as it may be. There is then the deep sea and the deep sea, or an abyss. So this contract is broken down, and Harald has been given the first level, the basic level of introduction of being a god steel or a god sword. The other ones vary in power, being the deep one being the closest to fully understanding or fully being bound to the true God. and only 13 individuals in the entire world have that privilege. We know 5 of them are likely the dudes in this room that are the 5 elders. So who are the other 8 individuals? Are some of the God's Knights, but not all the God's Knights? Are there other people we just haven't crossed paths with yet? 13 is a very specific number of individuals who have only attained that level within the deep, deep sea contract. But he questions who this god is, and he's like, only when you ascend to the greatest level of the pact will you one day fully know who God truly is and become a full God's Knight. And he's like, at that point then will Elbaf be brought in as a member nation. Saturn's like, well, naturally, at that point the entire world would be clamouring to welcome you if you were brought in as a God's Knight. So he's grateful to prove himself. So we go over to another place that I don't think we've properly seen yet in the Marijois, up in the top of the red line. We go to the Knight's Temple. So the God's Knight's Temple of Shangara, in the domain of the god here. Harald is walking through, and we meet a somewhat aged now Figurland Garland, a saint. He is there, he's in his black like robes and his sword, and we see that they are discussing what is happening, how this contract is going to work. And he's like, even though I'm the king of Elbaf, I will follow your words, you just have to ask. And Garland says, okay, we're going to have a long distance transponder to message you. You are to just travel the surface world. You are forbidden to speak about our dealings. But when we call, you will answer. And he's just like, yes, sir, understood. So we now jump 20 years before prior timeline. And we see Harald is having a jovial time with King Neptune in Fishman Island. Now this scene is incredibly important for one thing only. They are discussing, their time, they seem like really good friends at this stage, and they're talking about, their kids. He's discussing, Hyruden and Loki specifically, and Neptune begins to talk about a fortune teller has told him that in 4 years' time he will have a daughter. And this future daughter is going to be, the one who commands such power. And we can see he's discussing, maybe this could be a powerful alliance. She's going to be born with a power like no one else, Maybe Loki and my daughter, when, in the future, could, form a pact together, could be together, future troublemakers. And he says, that would be the perfect match, and they toast to their mischievous troublemakers and your little Mosa. If we go way back to when Loki was chained up to the tree and talking to someone on a transponder snail, he referred to them as Mosa. I think in the translation it got changed to Shaggy, but in the early adaptations of, translations, it was Mosa. Is this Oda confirming that Loki has been talking to Shirahoshi this entire time, and they've now formed a relationship and they've never met face to face? But when they do, that's going to be a pretty major moment, Neptune, Shirahoshi herself, who can command the sea beasts, and Loki, who we've yet to really see go full power. We are going to see some pretty big reveals coming. And we see during the same year, Harald returns to Elbaf and talks with Saul about opening up the school. So it was 20 years ago. 15 years ago, we are jumping around now in all these different major moments. Fisher Tiger had managed to escape up in Marie-Joie. He was obviously captured and enslaved, but in that time, it was known that he freed a lot of the slaves. We do see, Koala, we see Boa and her sisters. He was monumental in this sort of rebellion and escape from Marie-Joie. And it turned out he had some help. As he's running through the streets, a shadowed individual is stood in front, and he recognises that it's a God's Knight. He knows who this could be. And this individual looks awfully like Shanks. Pretty confident it is. And Shanks draws the blade, but doesn't cut Fisher Tiger. He breaks the chains that he's still bound in, the neck collar, his wrist gauntlet. He shatters all the chains to really set him free. And he's like, I've opened the armory for you. I'll tell you the location. This is like your chance. We see moments with Boa and her sisters escaping. We see a Koala, being told to run. The attack that was carried out by Fisher Tiger, in the wake of the incident, he would then become the captain of the Sun Pirates. The aftermath of that is the God's Knights themselves discussing, right, clearly someone has helped them. There is a traitor up here in the Holy Land because someone left the armory open. There was no way he could have done what he had if he didn't have help. We must find the culprit. Now, the reason I say Shanks earlier is because Shanks is revealed here. I've read ahead. Harald is introduced to Shanks. Figlin's like, allow me to introduce you to my other son. This is Shanks. He's Shamrock's younger brother, and they were separated for a long time due to different circumstances, but he has suffered many hardships in the surface world. If he were to form a deep sea contract, he may become a great asset on par with Shamrock. So obviously, Shamrock's been up in the Holy Lands and been a God's Knight for most of his life, I assume, whereas Shanks is newly joined. He travelled with Goldie Roger, he had his hardships, but for some reason he's come up to Marie-Joie. He's managed to get his way in, prove his lineage, and being accepted into the God's Knights. And Harald is looking at Shanks like, I've seen you before. I've got a feeling I've met you. They're both on the same rank. They're both a Godsteel. But he's talking and he's like, I just feel like, I've seen you somewhere. I said it to Shamrock as well. I just can't shake this feeling. And Shanks has a eye bandaged up. He's just got one eye currently. If we go back to a very old interview that Oda had, he said when a one-eyed pirate is to enter the story, that it would signify the end game, that we were in the final build-up of moments in One Piece. It was the final saga. We see Shanks here, and he has one bandaged eye, looking awfully like this one-eyed pirate Oda had referred to in an interview. And he's got this different decorum about him. He's talking about how this giant commoner from the surface shouldn't act so familiar with him. He's saying, I'm blessed to have been born with Figurlin blood in my veins. You don't talk down to me. And Carl's like, oh, apologies, I didn't mean to speak out of terms. And the next page is Shanks and Shamrock side by side in their full garments and attire of a God's Knight, talking, and this is insane. The brothers are just having casual chit chat at this point. They've had interactions. We've now got it confirmed that when they finally meet up in the current story, I don't think they're gonna be friends unless this is all planned out, because this is now Shanks' motive or way in, because if him and Shamrock team up and have planned this all out, it's gonna be insane. Because Shanks, we know this is obviously Shanks who said the panel was fairly obvious. It could have been Shamrock, like I think we've got two people here. But Shamrock is being depicted with longer hair here, whereas Shanks has got quite short hair. And he's talking about, I've come to deepen my knowledge of the Holy Land. I can't have it. I'm going to apprehend this traitor because they don't deserve to be here. Shamrock, do we have any leads? And he's like, whoa, 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 brother, calm down. You're not fully healed yet. You know, you can't fathom the anguish of having lost 24 years of your life wasted. So they're currently 24 at this moment. He's like, you just need to rebuild your strength. You know, we need to get to grips here. And Shanks is like angry. He talks about how he hates everything down on the surface. Is this an act, or is this a larger projection of Shanks's feelings? We've always seen a very jovial side to him. We've never seen him this infuriated, and he is young. You know, old Shanks has obviously gotten a lot wiser, has seen a lot of the world. But even Harald, there's a panel at the end here where Harald is like looking over his shoulder, specifically at the brothers walking away. And he's even questioning, like, I don't think he fully believes what Shanks is saying. I think he has seen them. The problem is, where would he have seen them? Because Shanks himself, in a prior Elbaf chapter, specifically in the flashback with Gabon, he spoke about the first time he met Harald was here in Marijois, and they got on well. I think Harold's going to have another discussion with Shanks, and it's going to be a bigger conversation about, you know, maybe he crossed paths when it was with Roger, or something else. He knows these brothers from somewhere. During this same time, Ida has fallen ill on Elbaf, and she's being treated and she's being looked after. They don't want, or well, she doesn't want anyone telling Harald. He doesn't need to, you know, worry. He's got a lot on his plate. He doesn't need to rush back. And they're talking about, you know, the doctors have checked you. We're gonna, you know, take our time. And they discuss that, you know, Loki's still turning up here, and Harald has gone off to sea with his friends in search of a doctor. So that's the reason Harald left with the new giant warrior pirates, to go find a doctor to heal, or at least look after Ida. And she's like, you know, I'm just happy I have this tavern and my sons, you know. The giant here is saying, you know, Harald has tried every time he's returned to get the elders to accept your marriage. And she's like, I just like this tavern. You know, I get to befriend these sailors from around the world. It's not much, but it's all I want. And we see a younger Loki now, like teenage Loki, like has knocked out this bull and is looking for Ida to, you know, cook it up this meat. He loves hanging out at this tavern because of how close he is with Ida and all she's done to look after. And she's like, it does make me smile, you know, those boys of mine have grown out, have grown up and have, you know, are so lively, but, you know, they are like the boys and sons I've always wanted. And then Loki continues to travel around Elbaf, and he returns to Alcohol Village, where Estrid, his own biological mother, is from. And he overhears people talking. He's like, hold up, what have you just said? And the guy's really maniacal and twisted. And he's like, oh, well, we couldn't bear it that Ida was, you know, gonna join the royal family. You know, that foreign giant, that was never happening. You know I'm right, aren't I, Lord? So obviously we poisoned her. And he holds out a violence, like, we've made her suffer in their fatal, her days are numbered, you know, she's going to die. And in this moment, you know, we can see there's panic over at Ada's tavern. She's in her final moments now already, and she's like, we may not be related by blood, but I see him the same way I do Hyruden. Loki is still my cute little son. And we go back to Alcohol Village, where the entire town is on fire. Like, there was moments, and it is just engulfed, and there is Loki cast in shadow amongst the flame with hammer in hand. That huge big hammer he's wielding, and he's holding this giant. Loki's now ancient. Like, Loki's towering this dude anyway, and we see how big he does get with his ancient giant blood. He's got this dude by the throat, being like, is Ada really gonna die, right? I still remember from the moment of my birth, my mother hated me. She had me thrown into the realm of the dead. Who gives a shit about inheritance? Everyone here is trash. You know what? Ada, she is the only mother I've ever known, and he is enraptured by anger here. Like, he is furious, and I'm pretty sure, has decimated this entire town in retaliation for killing his mother. I think Loki has such a tragic backstory. Like, I feel like we have all these devastating backstories get revealed, and all these characters that have overcome so much, and then we've got Loki here getting cast out by his biological mum, and then losing the woman who he looked up to as his mother in such a devastating way. Is heartbreaking. That is where the chapter concludes. Absolutely phenomenal. So much covered there. Can't wait to see how it all plays out. I think with almost a chapter or two, I keep saying this, but ultimately it's going to end with Harald dying again and what actually happened in that moment before it goes back to present day, because it has been a while now since we have seen Luffy and everyone. So it's going to be phenomenal next year when we are in present day Elbaf and it all kicks off. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Let me know what you thought of this chapter, and I'll see you guys next time.